with the women from there, the BIARIs, and they were kicked out of Sindh, the Pakistani part of Sindh, at the time of partition. And so this is taking their story clause, and a woman from the National Institute of Design turned it into an animation, into a film, about their displacement and about the war. So between Pakistan, or the conflicts between India and Pakistan. So we showed all of these to the women of Kilinoche. And this one we actually showed in its animated form. So again, the people being displaced, the bombings from the air, the military telling them, we don't want you in India. They're being collected and sent to IDP camps. I thought I had another one, but anyway. So it was when I showed this one that the women in Kilinoche started talking. And they said, oh my God, that's what happened to us. And I thought, for me, that was really, really telling, is that if you can show people in the midst of a crisis that they're not alone, that others have been through it, that they have come out of it, that they had ways of dealing with what happened and of collecting the stories so that they weren't invalidated, that was really powerful. So after that, we worked with the women in Kilinoche to both found a cooperative and for them to start making these story clauses. So this one is not that great, but it was the first attempt. And what they were doing is the women had pretty much a shared story here, but they were talking about normal life, and then when the chaos began to happen, and then when things began to spin out of control. But then we got displaced from Kilinoche after David Cameron came up in and called for a UN investigation into the genocide, and everything kind of fell apart. And so we got relocated down to Batiklo. But this past year, 2 of my Chinese students were working again with women both in Manar and in Kilinoche. And they tried it again, and this time it was far more successful. So the women came together and actually combined their stories, which I found really interesting. So here you have the people being displaced by the ocean, and the drownings, the loss of the few belongings they had with them. You have the bombing of the villages. You have the white van down at the bottom, which is how people would be disappeared. And so this is a tradition that we're trying to keep going. I then went and bought, sorry these are so wrinkly, they're the only images I have, but I went and bought cloth for a whole group of a whole number of other women's groups, and I showed them what we had done, but I didn't have time to work with them because this isn't the main thing we're doing. And so I left them with a cloth, and one of my colleagues went back and recorded these. These are all the mothers of the disappeared that have been trying to get some kind of answers out of the government forever. So just back to some of the other things that are happening. The women's groups will actually put women in situations that are unfamiliar, like these drums. The parai drums are actually an instrument used by the lowest caste and by men. And so the women will get together as drummers and again do these consciousness raising and these and do organizational meetings. So they're always trying to organize the communities, and both men and women. It's not just women. And then there are all the artists against violence so they try to do things like these rice powder footsteps, which I found really intriguing. There are a lot of memories that they're doing these visual memory projects about the traces left by what's not there anymore. So this one was about all the migration. So these paper boats were all let go into the Bay of Bengal. And again, it's about all the lives that are lost, all the people, all of the brain power that's been lost, and the fragility of all of that. And then this is actually by a male, but this was a project that was done in the house that during the tsunami and during the war was sheltering all the women from this one community. The men that tried to escape the military, there was a military attack, they went into the fields, they were all killed. And the women were in this house, which was eventually blown up, but the women survived. And so what Vassan was doing was he was recording their stories, but he was also drawing them on these white curtains. And when you went into this house and you pulled back a curtain, there was another woman, and you pulled it back and there was another woman. And so you were just going through kind of this maze of white curtains. And he said that's exactly how the stories unfolded for him. That every time he had a conversation with one person, he would lead to another. And then up in Jaffna, the women's groups have been, again, this idea of getting women into roles that are unusual and to do enough of it that nobody can really stop it. So they're creating a service that not just women want, but everybody wants. So they trained like hundreds of women to be tuk-tuk drivers. And in Batiklo, I think we have one female tuk-tuk driver, but they've kind of taken it over by storm in Jaffna. So, this is how, again, how to make not just the women more resilient, but everybody more resilient, is by really pushing people into these zones of unfamiliarity or discomfort. It's getting late, so I'm going to go past all of this. I just wanted to get to what was mentioned in the introduction, is the school that we have now opened. We've been trying to open a school for 9 years. We've had several different partners. And finally, in the last year, we decided the original group we were focusing on were the people most impacted by the tsunami and the war. In the last year, working with the universities so closely, we said, okay, maybe we're doing this all wrong. So we decided to go after the university graduates, because in the north and the east, 50 to 70% of all arts and humanities graduates are unemployed. And the government is very afraid of this. And they've also told me that they won't open any new program, undergrad or grad, for which there are jobs. And I said, that doesn't make sense. That's turning university education into vocational school. You need to build the jobs for the future that you aspire to. So anyway, I've been dealing with this a lot this year. This is actually something different, but and so that's our tack now, is to come in at this other level. I did want to just quickly show this because some of you were talking about games. This is a game I've used in my development classes. And I came up with it with one of my old students who had worked for the Peace Corps. And the idea was that we were setting up scenarios, and there was an aspect of chance in it. So the students would be picking out of a bag one of these people, one of these environmental conditions, and then as the game went on, they would be picking a disaster, and it was all chance. And they had to navigate through it and figure out where were their opportunities, how could they strategize a way to move forward. There was always this anticipation that things were going to get better right around the corner, and then something would get pulled out from under you. And then at the very end of the game, you go through the game with this very narrow focus because you're just trying to survive. And at the end, you get to a high point where you suddenly see that all of these ecosystems, all of these people and activities are actually in very close proximity. So one of the things we deal with a lot in working with communities is when you're getting stuck in the detail, what are the mechanisms that let you step back and get the longer view and the broader view so that you are navigating in a smarter way. So this was, again, these are just some of the pages from the game. These were some of the random figures that might wander into your world and what you do with them. Again. So I had a lot of industrial design students, so by giving them, 4 cans of tomato paste and glass bottles, what could they do with it? So this is our school. And so we're doing is we're focusing on postgraduate education. And TASI does stand for Transformative Arts Advocacy and Social Impact. So our main organization is in Providence. TASI East is the school in Batiklo. And our core team has a biologist who is Sinhalese and spent she spent the war and most of her professional career either in the US or England, and she's come back, moved to Batiklo. I'm part of it, and then we have 5 university professors who are all quite young. So there's a lot of brain drain because of migration, and most of the professors are right out of well, they call them lecturers, but they're right out of undergraduate school. So they're very young. So what we're doing is we're first focusing on those faculty members. And what we're doing is we're focused on the environment and design. So it's on the environmental issues that they're facing that they need to address. No one is addressing them. There are no planners. There's nobody doing environmental assessment. They occasionally, the UN will have the Australian universities do a study of risk assessment for this region. But there's no local capacity and capacity building. So that's what we're trying to do. And the design part is the scale of action. So whether you're talking about regional planning, regional, any kind of regional action versus urban planning versus site planning, so versus product prototyping. So we're doing all of that. So we're working as an environment and design research lab. We're working as postgraduate project-based learning. It's a 2-year program. We're running a business incubator, but what we're saying is that you only can go through our incubator if you have a commitment in your business plan to working with the people who are most impacted. So you need to train them and you need to bring them into the business model so that they have jobs and skills. And then the innovation center. So we're focused a lot on local materials and best practices and how do you do all of that. So again, I spent a lot of time trying to educate people in terms of how their land was actually formed, what their soils are actually made of, how their hydrological systems are operating, looking at all of the flooding issues and what's going on with the fabric. The government is giving away land like this on the barrier islands and saying, okay, build a new town here or move your university here. And I'm always the one who says, don't do it. So this was the new bridge they built to Kalani, and it took them quite a long time because they couldn't find any solid ground to hold it up. Some of the tsunami effects that are still there, some of the annual flooding in the city. This is a hotel that's built on this spit of land that it's literally sinking. The university is literally sinking. Again, this is what the government has done. They planted these pastorina trees that I don't actually think would do much. And we've had students who are studying other supplementary methods of beginning to build defense systems along the coast. Again, the women's groups are writing books about how women survived these disasters, and our focus is on, again, the women. Saying this is most of these unemployed university graduates are women. And so we're saying, okay, we have a void in terms of capacity and knowledge, skills, and we have people who are being underutilized and who are highly creative, highly intelligent. How do we put all this together? Sorry about my system slides, I'm not going to talk about them. But these are all things that we've been working on. I've been trying to teach them how to, all of the architecture that's done locally, they use architects from Colombo who never come. They sit in their offices in Colombo and look at Google Earth and send over a building plan that usually is modeled on a building from the west. So this building right here is a student hostel, and it's sinking. It's always full of raw sewage. And that's where the staff lives. Again, we've been teaching them about systems, about structures, using nature as our model. We've been looking at materials. We're talking about compressed earth block construction. We've gone and been trained at Oregon in India. And this is not one of ours. This is actually Architecture for Humanity, but this was a post-tsunami structure in the south. It's quite a beautiful building. Totally unused though. And then the last thing is that we've also been, one of our former partners, we've been working on children's, trying to get children to think about environmental planning and safe construction and best practices too. So this is using a water buffalo and a crow. The idea is water buffalo is always in the mud, you can always see what's in front of it, and the crow gets the big view. So constantly playing between those two, basic construction, basic mechanical information. So here's what we're looking at that. That's it. Sorry, it went longer than I wanted.
We will have the question and answer for today's talk. So since there are no microphones around, so we will just move around and do the microphone.
Thank you. That was very thirsty. I fascinated working with women, gender-based violence, but I wanted to see how the women's role or a women-led intervention in a humanitarian action in in an emergency context. Could you, for example, in Sri Lanka, so what would be the context of women-led intervention or action in an emergency?
I mentioned some of that last time, that one of the most important things they did was that they made their way into the camps and began to organize the women and organize them so that they could protect each other. And that was the best way. And they would have a member from their organization or several members there on the ground as witnesses. So this whole idea of bearing witness became very, very important.
Good morning, Lily. Would you be able to share with us if there was an experience of, or if you've witnessed how women gathered together and after a disaster and try to, I guess, form some semblance to early education when young children are left to do with nothing but women gathered their skills and talents and sort of provide young children with learning and learning opportunities.
I don't have a good example from Sri Lanka. I have a good example from Calcutta. And in Calcutta, we were working in the oldest red light district in the city, which I was telling some of you was in a former wetland that the government filled, well, actually the British filled it in, to be fair. And the government was, they were actively trying to improve that whole community for tourism because there's a very famous temple there. And it's right beside a canal that's a branch of it's the Adiganga canal. And the prostitutes live in these rooms that are about 6 by, I'm forgetting the exact size, but it's about 6 by 8 feet. And their beds are about 3.5 feet off the ground. And every year that area will flood for 3 months up to 3 or 4 feet. And so if the women's beds are not underwater, their children who normally sleep under the bed are moved onto the bed while the women are engaged in prostitution. So there was a group of women who came in and took over an abandoned temple in that neighborhood, and on the second floor built a creche. And they, so when they know the monsoon rains are coming, they basically evacuate the whole red light district of children and take them up into this second floor safe house. And then if they can't get them to regular schools, they do educate them there themselves. And they bring in a lot of foreign volunteers. But that's the only real example I've seen. I've actually seen a lot of activity like that in Calcutta.
Any questions at the side? Questions?
Thank you. Yes, I just would like to ask, are there any activities intended for men in order to support women, these groups in Sri Lanka? Because we understand that gender is both for men.
I missed the beginning.
Are there any activities, the targeted participants are men, which benefits actually
Yeah.
for women?
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to Enzo about this. There is not a lot of psychological help in Sri Lanka. It's a field that doesn't exist very much. And yet, one of the people who does the most for any kind of psychosocial assistance and teaches in the university is the husband of the woman who runs Surya. And so he moves between his job in Colombo and Batiklo, and he actually does a lot for male awareness of these issues. Does a lot to support both the women and the men who are going through these various traumas. The other man is on the university, he's on the faculty at the University of Jaffna. And he's written 2 books, one called Scarred Minds and one called Scarred Communities. And he too looks very deeply into gender issues as well as all genders. So he's looking at all sides and just trying to understand what's happening and spends a lot of time. He's part of that University Professors for Human Rights. So the few psychologists they have are very engaged. And they are some of the leaders that are actually moving between the women's world and everybody else.
Thank you very much for that very powerful presentation. I would like to personally ask you if during your extensive work experience, have there been reports, have been documentations of reports from women being abused or having experienced sexual violence by those doing humanitarian aid or those perpetrated by humanitarian workers, and if there are cases, what have been done to address them?
I honestly don't know what has been done to address them, but yes, there have been cases. And that's, so I think we probably all read about UN cases, and there have been a number of cases where UN workers have been accused of sexual violence. But there are quite a few documented cases from the IDP camps, but I don't know what was done.
Okay, additional questions? What?
Good morning. I'd like to know, Lily, have these initiatives undertaken by the women's group in Sri Lanka impacted their government? I mean, this gender-based issue, because of the so many initiatives undertaken already by these women groups, have these at least, like the Ministry of Education, the gender-based rights have already integrated in some of their government agencies?
There's a lot of lip service. I honestly don't believe that much has happened. Again, as I mentioned the other day, a lot of the strength that these groups have is that they're so tied into the international community. So these women's groups go to Geneva all the time. You know, they go to New York. They make presentations all the time before before the international bodies. And there are a lot of human rights lawyers who are, all through South Asia, but also all through Sri Lanka that are very, very involved. And then there's Radhika Kumaraswamy, who is Tamil and was the UN, what was she, the representative for women and children, I believe. So she's been a very strong presence, but she's not on the ground. And again, if you're not on the ground, then if you're part of the elite, I think you're always a little bit suspect, even though you may be doing good things.
Okay. Additional questions?
Sir.
Good morning. Thank you for sharing the stories of the women on the ground and your personal stories. So I'm more interested about social enterprises. So were there successful social enterprise initiatives being led by women, and how are they performing in terms of the triple bottom line? Because I've observed traces of social enterprises initiatives from public health advocacy, embedding the issues within the textile. So I'm thinking of whether this has been developed and further incubated to define social enterprise. Thank you.
It's a really good question, and it's something I personally am very interested in. So 3 years before I got my last Fulbright, I applied for a Fulbright to study emergent entrepreneurial activity among the women in Sri Lanka. It was rejected. I was told it was too controversial. So what I've seen happen is very small scale. There are female, and again, I'm talking about the Tamil and the Muslim communities where I work. I'm not talking about the Sinhalese side of the country because it's totally different world. And there are strong women business leaders, and they tend to be from the Muslim community. But they're not social enterprises. That's not their focus. And the ones that I have seen are very, very small scale. So it might be growing, what do you call them, decorative fish that you have in a fishbowl in your house. Or it might be, they do a lot with like repackaging bulk food and putting it into smaller packages. And that's when I first got there, that's the kind of enterprise that people wanted me to get involved in. I said, no, that's not the scale I can work at. It's not how I can be most impactful. And so it got them through the worst of times, but they're making, they're just making a few rupees. They're not developing skills. There's nothing sustainable, there's nothing scalable. And so that's why I reject it personally. It is important for the triage period, but as I said, that's not where I work. And so what we're doing is we're trying to work as an extension of the school idea, because a lot of our female students are interested in craft. And the craft industry has been very undermined. It's never been supported by the central government, and for this part of the island. And so we have a natural dye initiative. We've been told by some of the big textile companies back in Colombo that if we can actually help establish a natural dye industry, that they would be willing to use it. I still don't know that that's sustainable, but we are trying to train people to use that, and there's a whole behavioral side to that, because they're very used to chemical dyes from China and Germany, and they've changed their aesthetic over the years, and so how do you get them to be more sustainable, and how do you ensure that it's a sustainable business model? So there are things like that, but